the Ukrainians now just hold on to just a sliver of land on the Kursk side of the border there. I think we're talking about maybe 2 or 3 villages at this point. We're talking about much less than 10% of what they originally held. Suja has been entirely retaken. That happened a few days ago. Apparently, it's the one thing that maybe Zelensky said that was true was that they have sent in reinforcements, which just seems crazy, but the whole thing has been crazy all along, is to hang on to this sliver of land. I think maybe the justification now, and maybe the real fear, is that, well, the Russians are going to move in and take a big chunk of the Sumi region on the Ukrainian side. They've already taken some of Sumi. That was part of the kind of the Pincher movement that allowed them to cut off that supply route. But again, it's a place that's difficult for them to defend. It's open, it's flat. It's not, again, like the Donbass, which is the topography there. Not just the topography, but just all the extensive manufacturing facilities, the factories, the mines, and so on and so forth. All of that combines to make it very defendable. That it's just it's easy to build fortifications there, and even without fortifications, you can hide in a factory. There are natural defenses that you can work with, and then you can reinforce them greatly, with concrete bunkers and tunnels and so on and so forth, which is what they've done extensively in Donbass. But they don't have the land right there in Sumi and Kursk does not lend itself to that kind of defense, and it hasn't been prepared. I think they may be hastily trying to build some kind of fortifications, but again, like those fortifications in places like Avdiivka were built up over the course of 8 or 9 years, so they can maybe dig a trench or two, which will help them, but it's just not going to. It's not a very defensible area, and there's just no question that the Russians, if they are set on taking a chunk of Sumi, we don't know how much, but Putin himself said, well, now we need a buffer zone to prevent, a similar incursion in the future. So I think there's no question that they'll take it. And again, the Ukrainian solution always seems to be just to send in more troops, send in more reserves. And, the Russians see that, and they slow their advance, but then they just, again, understanding this is a war of attrition. Okay, you're sending in more reserves into an area that's very difficult to defend. Great. We'll destroy your reserves. So, again, it means a lot of death and a lot of destruction, but that's going to be the end result. And then the Russians will take Sumi. I don't think there's any question about it. Yeah, it's interesting. You get these ridiculous statements from Zelensky and Syrsky about, essentially everything, mission accomplished, no problem here, nothing to see here. This Kursk incursion was tremendously successful, and then we decided to redeploy, but in the West, and you do see articles like that within the Western press. I've seen a lot of it. It's just sort of like you would never know what a disaster it was. Somehow it's still a disaster for Russia. But the truth is coming out. There's some, I think the Telegraph and the Daily Mail in Great Britain have had stories that even with headlines like Kursk disaster. Where reporters actually talked to some of the soldiers that escaped, and they said, "Man, I'm just lucky to get out alive. It was a total fiasco, and it was just, we couldn't escape in armored vehicles. The only way to get out was on foot, and a lot of my comrades didn't make it." So the truth is getting out in spite of the effort to control the narrative by the Kiev regime, but. Let's see, what was I going to say? About the question of encirclement. I mean, I think Putin said that there were a number of troops that are encircled, and he had Trump asking him, not to let them go. And then there's denials on the other side that anybody's encircled. I think it's sort of like that maybe Putin overstated it. There was something like an encirclement earlier, especially when, remember, the 800 troops went through the gas pipeline. They came up from behind, and then these troops were being attacked from the front and the behind, and a lot of them, you could say it was not a total encirclement, but it was a near encirclement, and many surrendered, many were killed. Now, down there now, I guess it's west and south of Suja, where the remnants of the Kursk, the Ukrainian forces in Kursk are. They're not as far as I can tell, they're not totally encircled. It's sort of but they are. Their escape routes are very dangerous. So yeah, they could get out of there, but it's like, it's a roll of the dice, 50-50 that I'm going to get out of here alive. That's kind of what it is for a lot of them. So it's not a total encirclement, but they are in a tough fix, a real, and so again, I think that's what we're looking at.
Didn't Putin issue some statement saying that they have till Monday, today, this morning, to surrender or to be destroyed?
Yeah.
So we haven't heard anything about them surrendering, right?
Right. Well, there have been surrenders, but no, I don't think you would call them mass surrenders. It's the individuals and maybe platoons, that kind of thing.
Well, I think they're expecting an order from the top, right?
Yeah, that's what he asked for, is that, okay, you want to save these guys, well, again, their commanders need to say, okay, let's, to save their lives, we grant you permission to surrender, but they've refused that. This is, of course, this is the same old story. There have been many encirclements, many similar situations in the past, and the issue to retreat always comes too late. In fact, it's really meaningless when it does come, because typically what happens is just it gets to the point where they simply cannot hold the line. It's already, there's no safe escape route, but the soldiers just flee for their lives, and many of them are killed as they flee across these fields. And then at that point, the order to retreat is given, but it's just sort of like a cover on the part of the command. It's like, okay, yeah, we decided to redeploy or whatever, but it was after the fact, after the chaotic, run for your lives moment.
Well, what is the purpose of Zelensky to lie about what's happening in Kursk and say that things are fine, and then to redeploy more reinforcements there? You're getting another week of PR, but then the lie just becomes so apparent, right? Once you lose it, just like it becomes too difficult to defend Zelensky and his statement. It's very damaging to him, right? It's just saying, like, before with some of these conflicts with Avdiivka and Bakhmut, they lasted a long time. So he was kind of able to spin that PR a lot longer. Here in Kursk, where we have essentially a total collapse and there's only a little sliver of land, it's over. But still, he says that it's not, even though it's clear that it is. And no matter anything he does, he can maybe stretch it out for a week. He won't be able to stretch it out for another 6 months, or, like some of these other battles with Bakhmut or Avdiivka, things like this. So why? Why do that? Why?
Yeah. Well, of course, actually, though, Avdiivka, it took, let's see, it was approximately, maybe it was 4 or 5 months that the real battle went on. But the last couple of weeks, everything started to go very quickly, kind of like it has in Kursk. So in some ways, it's a similar situation. But again, I think on a larger scale, and the scale of the debacle is much greater and much harder to hide. So, he has been successful in maintaining the narrative in the face of reality over the course of these past 3 years. And, he has very, let's say, very effective and influential collaborators in the West. I'm just talking about the various media outlets. They generally provide him with a megaphone, so he can make up whatever story he wants, and then it's what's told to the Western public, and people generally believe it. And so he's doing the same old thing. He's just pretending that, he's got the situation in control. I think he's partly thinking about his own prestige, which has come under attack recently, most directly by Trump and by Vance. So he wants to pretend to be, the victorious military commander, and yeah, he wants to project an image of strength. Maybe it's kind of hard to understand the psychology. I don't know how rational it is, but he seems to live in a make-believe world, and that's again something that his aide said. I think told the New York Times a couple of years ago. So yeah, he's always about maintaining this image of Ukrainian invincibility and resilience and so on and so forth. Sometimes there's a grain of truth to it, but sometimes there isn't, like in the case of Kursk. And I think here the reality and the narrative have departed and left it, there's such a wide gap has opened up between them that he's losing control, because as I've said, again, these stories have come out in the British press. And then this morning I read an article in the New York Times that it worked to give some sort of spin, positive. I wouldn't say a positive spin to it. It admitted basically that this was a defeat for him. But it tried to just soften it and pretend that it wasn't an utter disaster. It was kind of a minor disaster or something, in typical New York Times fashion, using a lot of, obfuscatory language. And, but there is just an example where, he hasn't been able to maintain narrative control. I think he's lost it in this case. And I think we'll see more cases like this in the future, that over time, it's just going to be increasingly hard for him to lie and to be believed. I mean, he has been believed, and to a great extent that he still is. But, as the reality becomes more and more bleak, he inevitably will lose control over the narrative.
And then that just means the end of Zelensky, end of the war?
I don't know. That's the problem, is that you look at the people that are around him and the possible successors, people that might replace him if he's thrown out or if he resigns. It looks like he'll never resign. He's going to hang on to the bitter end. But if he is removed, one fashion or another, whoever's going to replace him is probably going to be a Banderite, to be honest. And so somebody who's going to be fully committed to the war, but maybe who will be able to actually more effectively command the troops. Yeah. So again, I think, I don't see any. At some point, things will change. But just looking at the picture now, looking at the alternatives to Zelensky, looking at the let's say the balance of forces within Ukrainian society, it just seems there's really not much reason to hope for an end to the war. We may get a new leader, but I think we're going to get the same policies, and the war effort will continue.